This has got to be my favorite rear delt exercise by 1,000 miles. And today I'm going to show you exactly how to set it up and how to execute it with a simple step-by-step tutorial. Now, the first thing that I want to say is that this variation is super unique, and the reason that it's unique is because it's single arm, and because the way that it's set up in terms of its loading parameters makes it so that it's a really, really good exercise for targeting the rear delt when the rear delt is as stretched as it can possibly be. A lot of the most common rear delt exercises do the opposite, where they only target the rear delt in a shorter position, a shorter length, which isn't bad, but if you're only doing those exercises, you're probably missing out on some gains. So this is a great exercise and one of the only variations that you can train that really full stretch position with. So the first thing that you're gonna do to set up this exercise is determine the height of the cable, right? You only need one cable to do this exercise, and so how do you figure that out? Well, you basically, as a starting point, can pretend like something is behind you. So imagine there's someone behind me and I'm trying to slap them in the face or something like that, okay? What I would do is I would reach behind me like this and I would try to perform the slap that way. And so the simple takeaway here is keep the elbow straight and just reach behind you like you're trying to grab something. And then what you'll see is, okay, where does my hand end up? Boom, put the cable right there. This typically ends up being around eye height or forehead height. So if you would rather not think about you're slapping someone, just start at around eye height, around forehead height, and then go from there. Once you've actually set the cable up, you want to be concerned about, okay, how do I grip the handle? How do I grip the strap if I'm using a strap? Well, first things first, if you're using a handle, here's what I'd recommend. Instead of gripping the handle like a normal human being might, what you're going to want to do, actually just move the handle totally out of the way of the webbing, and instead loop the back of the handle around the hand, specifically close to the wrist. So here's my wrist joint. You don't want to have this all the way over here. Tuck it in basically so that it's in the kind of groove between your pointer and your thumb here, and then basically just grab the handle this way and boom, you're locked in. You have pretty much no stress on your wrists or your fingers. Makes it so much easier, so much smoother to perform this motion. Now you could also get a cuff. I specifically love to use just an ankle cuff. I wrap the ankle cuff around my wrist and then I just, latch the cable on. Super simple. Both of those options work fantastically. Now, once you got that out of the way, then we got to start to actually try to do the motion. And what you need to do first and foremost before actually moving your arm is kind of almost twist yourself into the stretch position. What you're going to do is put whatever amount of weight on there that you just feel like is good for a warm-up. Grab the actual cable in the way that we described. And then from there, you're basically just going to straighten your elbow, keep your palm faced toward the actual cable itself, right? So you want to think about like a sort of palm up orientation, and then just start to go through some reps and feel, okay, where feels like a comfortable slot for me? Because that initial height that you set up, you might want to lower it one, you might want to raise it up one, but just experiment around with what cable height feels the smoothest and feels like you can achieve a really nice position comfortably of stretching that rear delt. And as you're executing the motion, you just want to think about maintaining that palm to the cable position the entire time. You know you're in a good position to stop the range of motion because just by the constraint of the way that you're facing away from the cable will basically run almost into your neck. And so you want to just basically stop right before that point. So again, make note of the fact that when I set this up and I start to pull the cable out, the cable's not just pulling to my side, it's actually pulling almost a little bit behind me. Kind of like I'm not fully facing perfectly away from the cable, but I'm kind of turned away from the cable a good amount so that again, it's going over my shoulder in the direction that my hand was initially set up. Now, a bit of advice for the actual execution portion of the motion is that a lot of people tend to want to do like a triceps extension thing against the cable. Try not to do that because we're not trying to do a triceps exercise. But you also don't have to be super stiff and rigid about, okay, keeping your elbow straight the entire time. What I would recommend is just a static elbow position. So what that means is that if you initially set up and your elbow is kind of like bent to this degree and you want to just move like this, that's totally fine. But notice that I'm just kind of holding that elbow bent position throughout the whole range. I'm not starting elbow bent and then elbow straightening, and I'm also not starting elbow straight and then bending the elbow as I pull. So if you want to start with your arm straight, great, keep your arm straight. If you want to start with your elbow slightly bent, great, keep it slightly bent. I wouldn't advise more than a kind of 90-degree bend in the elbow. That wouldn't make too much sense to me. But regardless of which one of those things you pick, just keep the elbow kind of in a static position, whether it's straight or slightly bent, both are fine. For those of you who maybe feel some excessive triceps recruitment, I would try the slightly elbow bent version. Because this is a cable variation and you can adjust it up to down to up in a million ways, again, I'll repeat, play around with the height of the cable that feels comfortable. There's no one answer, and play around with whatever sort of hand orientation feels more stable to you, more comfortable for you. I recommended this palm facing this way just as a starting point, but it doesn't matter if it's here or slightly here or here, whatever feels best. Now, one more thing that I think is highly underrated and crucial about executing this particular exercise is what you're doing with the non-working hand and arm. And so think about it this way. If you have something behind you that's pulling you in that direction, it's going to try to sort of twist you. So what you need to do is you need to either plant your elbow or your hand or somewhere on your forearm up against that cable stack. And that's basically just to prevent you from turning away from and toward the working arm as you're going through the motion, right? If you're twisting all over the place, you're distributing tension or redistributing tension from where it should be on your rear delt to the rest of your body, and specifically your spine in this case, if your spine is going to be turning all over the place. So just basically make sure that you have your opposite hand, opposite arm in some way planted against that stack, because that's going to be your base of support off of which you can actually create the motion. So just make sure that in some way your body is stabilized. You could also simply just lean up backward against the cable column itself, but I personally prefer to just have my elbow sort of jammed up against the column so that I can basically just go through the motion, really isolate that rear delt as opposed to anything else. There's a really concise summary of the step-by-step process here. Number one, set the cable height around the height of your eyes or your forehead. Step two, make sure you're jamming your arm or jamming something on your opposite side arm into the cable column itself so that you can be totally 100% stable while doing so. Number three, use a totally straightened elbow position or a slightly bent one and perform the motion, but either way, make sure that elbow isn't bending and straightening as you do it. And then finally, number four, stop the range of motion when the cable gets close to your neck. And again, make sure that the cable is actually pulling backward and behind you. This is supposed to be a more stretched position exercise. And so by definition, you're not going to be able to actually pull all the way out across your body because again, the cable is going to run into your neck. Oh, and then also remember the whole grip thing I talked about with the handle and just moving the handle out of the way, or, and this is my personal preference, use a cuff, use an ankle cuff, attach it to the wrist so you don't have to worry about any sort of hand, wrist, or forearm stuff. Now, if you're someone who's kind of broadly confused about how to set up and execute a lot of different kinds of exercises, I have a full exercise library. It has over 300 exercise tutorials now and counting, because I'm always making more at the request of people who have purchased the library. And it also includes short and long form tutorials, everything from 30 seconds to 10-minute tutorials for a bunch of different exercises. So if you're someone who enjoyed this video, then you're going to absolutely love the exercise library. It's currently for a limited time at 60% off, I think 65% off. Check the link in the description. You can buy it now and you'll have access forever and ever and ever. So if I eventually end up with thousands of exercises in there, I'll increase the price of the library itself. But if you buy it now, you'll have access to all the tutorials now and all the tutorials that will ever be created in the future. So check that out. Again, link in the description. Thanks for watching. See you all in the next one.